Hello and welcome. My name is Martin Stanley and I'm the author of the Death from Orc series, which starts with The Last Dragon Slayer and Ophelia, as well as a few other short stories. And I'm a member of quite a few writing groups on Facebook, and I got a lot of people asking questions about how to start writing anti-novels, how to publish them. So I decided to do a short series on the process of writing a novel and actually publishing it, with hopefully a bit of writing advice in there. I can't necessarily tell you how to become a bestseller. It's not something I've achieved myself yet. However, I did Open University creative writing and advanced creative writing, and I got a distinction in the latter, and I have sold thousands of books and I get great reviews. This first video is really about how to sit down and write that first novel and how you're going to start to go about it. And there's basically two types of writer, and they are the plotter and the pantser. Now, the trouble is, and something I think a lot of people don't actually touch on, is that this isn't an either or thing. You're not necessarily going to be a pure plotter or a pure pantser. What you'll find is it tends to be a bit of a spectrum where everybody is going to be somewhere between the sort of person who sits down and draws maps, writes character bios, draws character art, writes lore, writes history, creates a whole world before they've even written a single word, and then writes a complete plan of what's going to happen in every chapter, how many chapters there's going to be, and how it's going to begin, how it's going to end, and everything in between. That would be somebody at this point on the spectrum. And you'll get other people who maybe would say, okay, I'm just going to sit down and write whatever I feel like and see where it takes me, with no even idea where it's going. I've got an idea of a scene in my head. That's going to be the start of the novel, and we'll see where it takes us. And that person will be here on the scale. But the reality is probably most people are somewhere in between these 2 points. Some people maybe even start as a plotter, but partway through the novel they can see that things are going in a different direction than they expected to, and they abandon the plot and start pantsing. Other people might start pantsing and get to a point where they think, okay, I've got a few chapters down, it makes sense, I like what I've written, I'm now going to figure out how it ends and plan how to get there. The way I tend to work is I tend to have a idea, which is roughly how something starts and how it ends. And that's what I start with, really. The start and the end. And then I will write the start. I'll write a chapter. I'll start with the first scene, the first page, and I'll try and get a good solid chapter without really doing any serious plotting or planning. And I'll at that point have an idea of how it's going to end. Once I've got this first bit here, this first chapter, first page, whatever, I've introduced the characters, I've hopefully drawn the reader in and got them interested in what's happening, and I can read it back and I like it myself. At that point, I'll try and think about how this ending is going to be played out, and then I'll start writing towards it. And by that I don't mean planning it and deciding exactly what's going to happen next. I will just decide what needs to happen next to get me closer to this ending. At some point I will get to a stage where I realise, okay, I've now got 20,000, 30,000 words, I've got closer to this ending. I know, because of the genre I write in it, I probably want 80 to 90,000 words, maybe a bit more. as I sell mainly ebooks, it's probably better to be around 80 to 90,000 per book. And at that point, I'll be looking at the ending and saying, okay, how far away am I from here? Let's say 20,000 words from the ending at 90,000 words. And what needs to happen to get me to that ending? And how am I going to write that ending? And at that stage, when I'm out and about and I'm thinking about the story and the novel and where it is and where it's going and how I'm going to get there, I'll sit down at the computer, and at the end of my document, which I've started pantsing, where you've got chapter written down here, I'll start putting in square brackets here things that need to happen to get me to where I want to get to. And once I've written this bit out, I will delete that bit, tell me what to do next, and I'll then write the next bit. Sometimes there'll be something that I know needs to happen, and there's a scene that I need to write to advance a story or to develop a plot point, but I don't know quite how to write at that stage, and it might be easy to write that later. So what I'll do is I'll leave that bit where it is, and then go to the next one that I can write that out, and then once I've written that section or that scene, delete that marker. And then back at the stage when I've finished writing all the way from the beginning to the end, and I'm proofreading it, there might be some scenes that I need to write, but by then I'll know how it ends, so I can maybe put a bit of foreshadowing in and try and write the whole novel as one. There are advantages and disadvantages to both of these techniques. I think the difficulty in being a pure plotter is actually it takes a long time for you to get to the stage where you're going to write that first line of the novel, and that can be quite disheartening, and you might write the most detailed plan in the world that covers every possibility, but then as you start writing it, you might find that something doesn't actually work and you need to abandon your plan or redo your plan. The disadvantage of being a pantser is you'll get so far into your work and then you'll realise, because you haven't written out a plan for anything, you've got to reread what you've written so far anyway to make sure everything makes sense and to tie everything together. You'll end up rereading your work a lot anyway, because it's the only way you're going to get it right. But you'll read it more if you're a pantser than if you're a plotter. I think really the best way to write is to be something between the two, either start as a plotter and end up doing a bit of pantsing, or vice versa. That's my process. That's how I start to write. The only thing I would say, and it's an interesting point, if you start to write a character and you've plotted a novel out for the character and you've plotted out their story arc, you can come to a point where your characters can take on a life of their own and they become a little bit organic. If at the start of your novel you've written a character behaving in a certain way, X, then they encounter a different situation later on in the novel which you'd plotted to resolve in a certain way, but actually in your plot the way they were going to deal with that situation and the way they were going to overcome that conflict or difficulty doesn't match with the sort of person you've written them to be. You then got to rethink that. You've got to try and be consistent with the way your characters behave and the way your characters tackle things. And you also want your characters to change a little bit. Maybe not a lot, but there wants to be some sense of them going on not just a journey as in a physical journey in the book, but a developmental journey to becoming a different person. Maybe not necessarily a better person or a worse person, but there should be something about the character that changes over time. And when you're trying to write that, you've got to always look back at how your characters behave and what sort of characters you've written them to be, and you've got to stick to that, or you've got to have a logical explanation for the difference, and you've got to make that organic and natural, and that's one of the difficulties. But every time you reread your work and you look back at what you've put, you can fix it, and you can get further along, and that's pretty much the basic way to start a novel from my perspective. I think whether you're a plotter or a pantser, you need to decide how you want to tackle this idea of writing a novel. But my advice is, like I say, start with an idea. Once you've got your idea, have an idea of how it starts and how it ends, and then write the start and get the start really well. Edit it, read it back to yourself, maybe show it to a friend who you trust their opinion. And once you're happy with the start, you've then got a foundation upon which you can build your story. And then you can look at where it's going to end and start trying to organically write your way in that direction. And hopefully, at some point, you'll have the right amount of work down and you'll see where you're going, and you'll be able to figure out how to fill in the gaps. I hope that's been helpful. It's only a short one today. I'm going to be doing more of this series. This is the first one, and if it's been helpful, leave me a comment, leave me a like, and I'll hopefully see you on the next one.